Hello, and welcome to Drop the Act, brought to you by Performing Perfectly. I'm your host, Chris Key, and today I'm joined by a member of the SAS. No, not that SAS. I'm joined by one half of the prolific footballing stripe partnership of Shearer and Sutton. Welcome to episode 5 of Drop the Act. Now, here at Performing Perfectly, we deliver courses in leadership, high performance, and effective communication, to name but a few. And today's guest has experienced high performance and leadership on the football pitch and is now a communicator of it. He first rose to fame as a goalscorer for Norwich City, and then a record-breaking transfer took him to Blackburn Rovers, and it was here that he formed that formidable partnership with Alan Shearer, and it was their goals that fired them to the Premier League title in the 1994-95 season. He then went on to play for Celtic, where he won multiple league titles and also appeared in the UEFA Cup final. Now, he can be found as a football pundit and commentator on many of the football channels and can be heard on Radio 5 Live on 606 with Robbie Savage, as well as the Monday Night Football Club. So, let's drop the act and have a word with Chris Sutton. Can you subscribe? Really appreciate it. Good afternoon, Chris. How are you?
Yep, very, very well. Thanks, Chris. Thanks for having me on.
My pleasure. I really appreciate it. I think I'll start most recently, so from when I met you, before I sort of explore back into your playing past. And we met on a course you were doing about keynote speaking. So transitioning maybe at that point from footballer and pundit to standing up in front of audiences, and I came in and did a bit of communication work with you. Was it always a plan of yours when you were playing to think punditry and keynotes? Was that something at the time, or was this something that you felt you needed to find after football?
Well, when I was playing at Celtic, Glasgow Celtic, north of the border, I was known in the dressing room for saying, if you ever see me on the television commenting on other players, you can smash me around the head with a baseball bat. And Martin O'Neill, my old manager, tells that story quite a lot, actually. So it wasn't. It certainly wasn't my plan when I was playing. My plan when I was playing basically was just to concentrate on the job which I was doing, and that was hard enough, and just all my focus and energy going into football. But after I played, I managed very briefly at Lincoln City, who were in League Two, and then I had started sort of falling into punditry. And then, and then it just really grew from there, as much as anything, the punditry role. And I thoroughly enjoy it. I'm lucky enough to work for 5 Live, and I was at the Euros in the summer. I was at the last World Cup in Qatar. I currently work for Sky as well. I basically work for anybody who will employ me.
Don't we all,
Chris? So yeah, exactly. And I realise that. That there's a certain shelf life, I think, in well, not in every profession, but in a lot of professions, and I'm just going to keep going for as long as I can. I really enjoy my job, my different roles, either sitting in a studio commentating on games, doing podcasts, or summarising. And summarising is probably the most difficult skill, but you're calling things as you see it in that moment. There's people either watching on television or listening on the radio, and everybody has pretty strong opinions on football. So you're under real pressure to try and get things right. And I put a lot of preparation into the role which I do now. And hopefully I'm still in a job, and so long may it continue. But I thoroughly enjoy my role. I've mentioned the tournaments I've been at, but travelling around either Europe or the Premier League or Scottish football, visiting different grounds, meeting different people, I'm very lucky to do it.
And when we met, we were, obviously talking to you about communication, the skills of that you need to be able to communicate. Have you found that this is something that's come quite naturally to you, or have you really had to think about how you deliver, how you present yourself, and what sort of work has gone into that transition from footballer to
to public speaker?
Um, I think in some respects I've had to learn on the job. I found the session which we did uh, together really very very helpful. I have had coaching from a guy at the BBC, especially in the early days, about the different parts of punditry and broadcasting. But in many respects, his advice to me was just, make sure you have opinions. Say what you think. Have strong opinions, and if you can back it, or back it, make sure you can back it up, and that's the biggest thing. But I am massive on preparation, and I drive my wife and family nuts. I probably would do anyway, but I spend most days just thinking about the next job and preparing, and whether, I mean, on Wednesday I'm at the Champions League game, Manchester City, Inter Milan, big game. I haven't seen Inter for a while, so I'll be making sure that I'm prepping them heavily in the next couple of days, because I want to do as well as I can. And I'm not one of those, and there are, I'm sure, people out there who can just rock up and are brilliant off the cuff, but I have never been one of those types. I'm all about getting the head down, prepping, thinking about different possibilities and outcomes, and trying to cover all bases as much as anything.
I spoke to Clem on the podcast, Mark Clement, who does a lot
yes.
of, yeah. And Clem said, he likewise, it's all about the preparation for him, because he knows walking into whatever situation it is, if he's done the homework, then he knows he can deliver. And it's obviously the same for you as well. Does that come from just from obviously knowing the facts and knowing the players, or what about the actual performance itself? Do you ever have to think? Do you ever look at yourself? Do you ever to film yourself? Would you listen back to the stuff you've done and think, how was I there? Could I improve there? Or how do I sound? How do I look? Does that play a part for you?
Absolutely, and I ask for feedback, which I think is really important from the various companies who employ me. And I'm always big on, if I've said something I think I'm going off track, then please tell me. And it's not that I get loads of feedback from my employers, but I get feedback from my family.
Yeah.
and my sons are all grown up now, and I've got to say I really appreciate it, and I do listen back to things, and I am, and I've always been, and I was as a player, I am very critical of. It's always been my mantra. When I played, I would come off the pitch and evaluate what I could be better at, and really work hard on that. And it's the same in broadcasting. And I don't think I've ever listened back to myself and thought I was perfect. So there's always things to work on.
I think our company is called Performing Perfectly. And I think someone said to me once, does perfection exist? And I said, well, not necessarily exist, but it's certainly what we're aiming for. You never go on to, into a situation wanting to be anything less than that if you can. So I think preparation is key for that. And I think that's something, we go into a lot of businesses and people don't think like that. They don't think about asking for feedback, asking for guidance, or even rehearsing the keynotes or the sort of speeches that they're going to deliver. So I think it's a good little something you can take there into the business world as well.
Yep, I think it is. Look, my view is I want to be the best that I can be, and that's I always work off the back of that. I want to, in every role I've ever been in, and that comes from my upbringing, my dad being a huge influence on me to really work as hard as I possibly can. And why do I want to do that? To give myself the best possible chance. And I still sort of live with that and work off the back of that. And I'm not perfect. I get a lot of things wrong. I always think, if you get something wrong, though, do you know what? Hold your hands up, flag it up,
own it.
And own it, laugh it off, because everybody makes mistakes. But the fact that I do put so much into preparation, I can accept that. If I didn't do the preparation and then I was messing things up left, right, and centre, I understand that that my employers, wouldn't be best pleased with that. But I think, basically people know that I do put a shift in.
Before I pressed the record button, you said to me, I think you said I'm a straightforward guy. Sort of what you see is what you get. And I think I wanted to ask you about that because authenticity, I think, is so important when you're communicating. And obviously, I'm a big football fan, and I listen to 606 quite a lot. And you and Robbie have got the whole sort of double act going on, and you often get the stick, if you don't mind me saying, for being blunt, and I think Robbie would sort of pick you up on being a bit dour sometimes. But how much did you think, is there ever a persona that you sort of find yourself falling into and sort of playing a character, or is it completely, no, this is me and I'll say it how it is and I don't care who I upset in the process?
Well, I think you always have to, with the 606 role, with all the roles, you have to try and back up what you say because you don't want to appear foolish. I mean, 606 is I really enjoy it. I love it. I love Robbie. But most of the stuff on 606 is tongue in cheek. It's a bit of fun. It's a football phone in on a Saturday night. And I mean, the amazing thing is, I don't know that I should be telling you this, there is no drop button. So, people can phone up and say what they like, and you have to work off the back of it. And obviously there are lots of different subjects within football, which we always have to be aware of and prepare for. But it is flying by the seat of your pants, that show. It's not as easy as what people think, but there is the entertainment part of it, which is that's what we're trying to do in the back and forth. I don't think we necessarily manufacture opinions. We feel what we feel. And no, I thoroughly enjoy my role. And people think I'm dour, Chris, and people think I'm a bit miserable, but I'm happily dour and I'm happily miserable. So
I think
it's just the way I've always been.
I think that comes out more and more, and Robbie certainly leans into that. So, going while we're on the subject of communication, just going back, I'd love to just talk about sort of in your football career and communication and how how that differs there, how that plays a part from not just on the pitch, but certainly as leaders and managers and people you worked with, going right back to the beginning. Obviously, you started. Well, certainly Norwich was where you really hit the ground running. And is there anything you can sort of remember from that time, and who were great communicators and what it was that they did that affected you?
Well, the biggest influence on my career was my dad. I was rejected at Norwich as a 12-year-old, and my dad was a former professional footballer, and big into his sports. He was actually my PE teacher at school. My dad was, but communication and sport it's all about clarity as far as I could see all the way through my career, and clear communication. And my dad was always, and I've touched on it already, was big on practice more than anybody else, do more than anybody else, and that is what I did from the ages of 12 to 16 when I went to high school, and my dad was my PE teacher. I used to go in the gym every morning and kick a ball against a wall while my dad would prepare for lessons for about 45, 50 minutes. And then at 8 o'clock every morning, my dad would come in, and there'd be other teachers and other pupils who were really keen on their sport, who would come in and would do these fitness sessions in the gymnasium: pull-ups, rope climbs, bench jumps, squat thrust, burpees. And I actually think that those 4 years and participating in other sports were the 4 years which really kicked me onto another level and gave me a base and a core, real base and core fitness level. And then when I went back to Norwich City, I got another. I was playing quite well for my school team, and there was a Norwich City scout there. I went back in my GCSE year. I'd played well in the county cup competition. They'd asked me down for a trial at the end of the season. I think I'd taken my GCSEs, just taken my GCSEs, but I had a 2 week trial period, and they gave me an old apprenticeship contract, a youth training scheme, and within that 2 year period, I'd played for Norwich City first team, so I'd basically come from nowhere. So the 4 year period I was at high school, the kicking a ball against a wall, I must have kicked a ball against a wall thousands and thousands and thousands of times, more than most kids, and that, of course, doesn't necessarily make me better than the many players, but I think that was a crucial period for me. And then you marry that up with all the fitness work, which I'd done when I went back to Norwich City, and there were boys who had been part of the system, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, who had been signed on schoolboy forms. And I thought that they felt, I don't know whether this is right as well, I thought that they felt that there was maybe going to be a natural progression from them to just make it into the first team, and it was going to happen for them naturally. But when I got my chance again, I was miles ahead physically of boys who had signed the contracts when they were 12, and I kicked on, and I actually think I would tell myself mentally that I was more hungry than them, and I wanted it more. And I can't judge that really, but that's the way that I felt, and I thought, got a second chance, don't let that pass me by. But all that was down to the grounding, and my dad being a brilliant mentor. And I would describe my dad. I mean, nowadays it'd be interesting to it was tough love, really. He was a strong character, but I can't tell you how much I appreciated that he was tough. If I didn't want to do something, he'd give me a kick up the backside, and talk about the importance of practice and training. And he hadn't ever been given anything on a plate, and he'd had a professional career and went into teaching. And I've got two brothers and two sisters, and my dad was a real grafter and a hard worker. But his values are all about doing the best that you can, train hard, and play to the best. And if you train hard, you can just enjoy your sport and play to the best level which you can play. And I could play lots of different sports: cricket and table tennis and basketball. It's brilliant environment to be brought up in at that particular time. But all him certainly pushing me was the biggest thing, I think, in my career, and started me off on the right line, really.
I mean, there's a number of things you just said that I'd love to pick up on. I'll just start first with that whole aspect of resilience. You're sort of talking about that first setback with Norwich City, and how your own mental attitude and resilience, and coupled with your dad's determination and grit and sort of will for you, helped you succeed the second time round. Were there moments then through your career where resilience really played a big part, and you had to draw back on that, or you felt you'd built that at an early age and it was something you could then adopt later in your career?
I don't think I'd necessarily, when I was rejected at 12, I don't necessarily think I'd built resilience at that time. I thought that was the end of the world and felt sorry for myself.
Yeah.
as much, and I did, because I thought that was my dream over. So that was more my dad who picked me up, and was just wanted me to play sport, enjoy sport. And they're the same messages which I give to my kids. Sport, I think, is brilliant. You go to school, you have your friends from school, but then you join a club, a football club, a cricket club. It's about finding your tribe, isn't it? And people have a common interest. It doesn't matter what it is, but there are so many benefits from playing sports. And I mean, it's team sports or whatever, and that's something which I've tried to relay with my kids. But then, when I got my second chance at Norwich and I took it, and my career really progressed quite quickly, and ended up moving to Blackburn Rovers after a successful period at Norwich, where I'd come into the sort of national spotlight because Norwich we were high flying team at that particular time. It was a different club back then to what it is now. We finished third in the Premier League in the inaugural Premier League season, the 92-93 season. And my profile grew because I was a young player. I was versatile. I could play centre back. I went into Norwich City's first team as a centre back, but then really established myself as a centre forward. Went to Blackburn, won the Premier League with Blackburn. Had 5 pretty successful years there, but then I had a bad season at Chelsea. And I'd gone for big money, £10 million from Blackburn to Chelsea. And of course, you go for that sort of money, the scrutiny is on you as somebody who needs to deliver. I was a centre forward. I didn't score a lot of goals, and I lost probably for the first time in my career where everything had been on an upward trajectory. Chelsea hit me hard, and I think I lost a bit of confidence, and I had a bit of doubt. So that's when things didn't go well for me at all at Chelsea. But in terms of resilience, then I cared deeply because I wanted to do well, and I think there's this misconception that if you're paid a lot of money, then footballers don't care, which is utterly ridiculous. But I think some people do or did feel that way, and I did care, and it sort of it was killing me, taking it home to the family, moods and what have you. But in the end, not saying I hit rock bottom, but I wanted to get back on track, and I mean there is no choice really, other than you've got to pick yourself up, dust yourself down, and go again. Always, my mantra has always been back to practice, back to the training ground, get out there, spend hours more than anybody else, and and that was the way that I always worked like that. And in the end, it was a change of environment, and going up to Celtic, which didn't necessarily. I didn't have to go to Celtic. I had a 6-year contract at Chelsea, but I felt the move would sort of benefit a fresh start and what have you. And maybe I could have turned it around at Chelsea. But in terms of resilience at that particular time, it was all about really working hard on the training ground, practice, preparation, and that sort of helping me mentally as much as anything. And I think throughout my career, although I don't know whether you ever saw me play, but I was never the quickest player, but I always got my confidence from fitness, preparation. And if I was fit and I'd done the hard yards, I always felt that, not that necessarily I'd always go out and play brilliantly, but I always felt that I had mentally the beating of my direct opponent, because I would be fitter, I would outlast them, and that was something which gave me great confidence. I think times throughout my career when, not that I necessarily doubted myself, but was when I knew I wasn't quite at the fitness levels which I should have been, and that may be because coming back from injury or whatever. So, so it was all about fitness for me.
So again, it's that awareness of where you need to be and where you are, and then putting in the hard graft to get there, I suppose, and back to the sort of preparation and practice. Yes, I obviously I didn't see you play in the flesh, but in was Blackburn 1996 when they won the Premier League?
94, 95.
94, 95. So yeah, I was 17, 18 and a big football fan. So that was obviously a massive moment, because it was a shock for many people at that time for Blackburn to win that. got so many things I want to ask you. Just first of all, just about the switch from defender, centre half to centre forward. How did that come about? Was that through somebody seeing that talent in you? Was that through necessity? You going, well, it's, I've got a chance up there. I'm going to push for that. How did that switch come? Because obviously you made yourself your name as a centre forward, so that transition was a blessing, maybe.
It was. I'd never played centre half before I had gone to Norwich City, and I had my apprenticeship at Norwich City. And in truth, Chris, I think it was because I was tall that they put me as a centre half one week. These weren't the days when there were probably 6 or 7 other boys who were part of who were my age as apprentices, 7 or 8 in the year above. So you had a first year and a second year, and we would make up the Norwich City youth team. And so the youth team coach at that particular time put me as a centre back one week, and one of my best strengths really was my ability to read the game, and so I found centre half pretty comfortable, but I always found playing at centre back, and then I would to and fro from playing centre back and go back up front. I always found that as a great benefit, and I found it as a great benefit because I could steal ideas off good centre forwards I played against when I was a centre back, and vice versa, the other way round. When I was a centre forward and playing against centre backs who were better than me, and I would sort of nick their ideas and their way of playing and implement it into my own game, and I found that hugely beneficial. And also the environment. So into the youth team, doing well in Norwich City's youth team. Within the space of a couple of months, I was in Norwich City's reserve team. And then this is where the pathway was really important to me. Of course, the reserve team is one step away from the first team. So within the space of literally 5 months, where I'd completed my GCSEs, I'd gone on this. I was playing for my school team in a county cup final. Norwich City scout was there. Within probably 5 months, I was finding myself playing up against the likes of Paul Walsh, who was a brilliant player, Vinnie Samways, established footballers, Paul Davis, who was a wonderful Arsenal midfielder, playing at Highbury, playing at White Hart Lane, and up against established first team players playing for Norwich City reserve. So that in a short space of time, I mean, I could never have imagined being in that position. And of course, when you're thrown in like that, it's a bit of a feather in my cap that the Norwich City coaches at that particular time had that confidence and faith in me. But then it's about learning and learning quickly. And in truth, I was a pretty fast learner. But I also think playing against these guys who were at a far higher, different level to what I was at that particular time, that was hugely beneficial. But also, it was beneficial because I felt I wasn't far away, and I felt that I was close, and that gave me great confidence. But it was in terms of training and my mindset at that particular time, I would describe myself in those years. I was a ferocious competitor, and little things like in pre-season, the youth team coach would always be big on make sure you finish in front of the first team with in the running. They've earned the right to jog around at the back if that's what they want to do. And that was a pretty tough environment, not always the nicest environment, because when you're in the youth team environment, you're part of a team, you're part of a club, of course you are, but you're also vying for positions and contracts, and it could become pretty sort of brutal at times in that respect. So that's where you had to have that strong mentality, and I think my mindset, I was ready for it when I went back in, and I could shut things off, and I was good at just focusing selfishly on me and my career, and not, I understood the environment I was in at that particular time. Of course, football is a team game, but in those early years, especially, there's a lot of vying for position, and so that they weren't easy years.
It's I always find that quite fascinating, that idea of playing as a team, but actually being on that pitch as an individual. And I suppose as a centre forward, it's slightly easier because everyone wants you to stick the ball in the back of the net. You know you've got to score those goals, and the team will benefit. But to play as a team, to have that, but feel that there's competition elsewhere amongst individuals, must be a difficult environment.
Well, you know what? That's interesting, because one particular striker who I played with at Norwich in the youth team would very rarely pass to me. He would he would shoot from some ridiculous angles, but in the end, he didn't get a professional contract.
Yeah,
That was that was that was detrimental to him. I was always I understood what type of player I was, and that may be. I used to speak to my dad for hours on the phone most evenings, but I had a good awareness of what my strengths were, what my weaknesses were, working on my weaknesses um, greatly, and then I would also be big on direct opponents who I was up against. I wanted to make my life as easy as possible and dominate. If I was a centre forward, dominate centre halves I played against. So why would why would I want to? And this was all throughout my career. Why would I want to make my life difficult going and playing up against a centre half who physically could match me or maybe dominate me, when I could go and maybe stand on a weaker opponent and dominate them. So that was always a large part of my mindset. And actually, as I went through my career, and especially at Celtic, myself and a guy called Henrik Larsson, who was a wonderful footballer, he had a stellar career. I mean, we used to sit and speak and analyze opposition and discuss, who would be the centre half. Not that you're always up against somebody directly, because football, things change, but in the main, we would think about we would speak about who we would prefer to play up against, and where we could show our greatest strengths, really. So that was a large part of my game as well, really, evaluating opposition, direct opponents. I always thought that was an important part of the game.
You mentioned your sort of mental attitude, your sort of strong willpower and your focus. How important was that when, I believe, when you went to Blackburn, was that 5 million? Were you the most expensive British footballer at that time? Is that correct?
Yes.
Does that then, playing then with that title, did you feel the pressure, or did your mindset and your belief help you ignore that?
No, I felt the pressure. I didn't like it. I mean, I was only 20, or I'd have been 21, I think, and so I mean, Norwich City. I mean, I lived in Norwich now. Norwich was a club where we exceeded expectation. The expectation levels just weren't there. But we overachieved there. So if we'd play against Manchester United or Liverpool, nobody would expect little Norwich to win. So it was it was a pressureless place really to play football in the nicest possible way, and we ended up nearly winning the Premier League. And as I've mentioned that already, 92-93 season, not once can I ever remember having a conversation in the dressing room with the players actually talking about actually winning the Premier League, if that makes sense. I don't think we ever thought we possibly could, but it was a great environment to play in because the expectation levels weren't there. So I'd go out and I could play. I enjoyed it. I could play with freedom. I was lucky that I played with a lot of talented players, and as a striker, you're very reliant on service and people to create opportunities. And we had a more than a couple of good intelligent players in the team who I worked up a really good relationship with them. Little things like we had there's a guy called Ian Crook. I don't know whether you remember Ian Crook.
Yeah, I do.
He was skinny. He couldn't run. He couldn't head. He couldn't tackle. He used to smoke 40 cigarettes a day, but boy, could he pass.
Yeah.
I mean, he was a phenomenal passer of a football. And we used to have a little free kick routine where he would he'd put his hand on the ball, he'd look up, we'd make eye contact. I'd spin off the centre half. He'd take one step back, and I think I scored 3 or 4 goals in the 93-94 season with that routine, and I would run away and celebrate myself, and that would all be about me, when that was really him who had the ability to create those opportunities. So Rural Fox was another guy I had a really good relationship and an understanding with. And I was very lucky to be nurtured in that environment with players who were older than me and experienced, and who helped me a lot. So I then had the opportunity I could have gone anywhere at that particular stage. I could have gone to Manchester United, Liverpool, Arsenal, Spurs were in for us. So that was the Spurs. I mean, Alan Sugar was chairman at that particular time. George Graham was the manager of Arsenal. Sir Alex Ferguson, manager of Manchester United. Roy Evans, Liverpool. But Blackburn were a team on the up at that particular time. And Kenny Dalglish was the manager. Blackburn had pushed Manchester United the previous season very, very close. And they had an owner called Jack Walker who was he was sort of hoovering up all the best young talents around at that particular time. So I ended up, I had a good season at Norwich, scored 25 Premier League goals, going to Blackburn. But because I'd gone for this it's a British record transfer fee at that particular time, where I used to enjoy buying newspapers because I was getting lots of praise in them every day at Norwich, and there was no great pressure, and all this sort of praise and people bigging me up. And then before I'd kicked a ball at Blackburn, there were people writing articles, questioning, was I worth the money? Was I really that good? Was my game, was I a real all-rounder? I remember my debut for Blackburn was on a pre-season tour in Norway, and the team we were playing was called Steinke. And I think we ended up winning the game. I can't remember the result. As a pre-season game, the game was irrelevant. And I didn't play badly, but I didn't score. So the headline on the back of the paper was Sutton has a Steinke.
Yeah.
And that was sort of, that. So in the early stages, that negativity was there. But I scored, I think on my home debut, I scored against I think it was Leicester, and that was important because the money which had been spent, and that just gave me a bit of confidence. I then scored a hat-trick, I think, a week or two later against Coventry City. I was playing up front with Alan Shearer, and we formed a really good understanding, a good partnership. And then it was, things at Blackburn went well, especially that season, winning the Premier League. But then it's it's about understanding one's role in a particular partnership. And I was always pretty good at. I've said about understanding my strengths, my weaknesses, but also I was pretty good at understanding my role within the team. And strikers are a strange breed, and mostly everybody wants to be, the um, most strikers want to be the sort of main guy and the top scorer, and it's all about ego. I never really minded playing a secondary role at times because playing with the likes of Shearer, playing with Larson, I knew that they were better than me, but I also understood my role and my contribution would be important for the team. So things like that never really bothered me. And some people may, I don't know how you'd feel about that. Would say, well, you lack ambition because you didn't want to be the sort of main guy. I did when I was growing up, but I always felt it was a strength understanding my role and being appreciated in the team by by other players.
It's interesting when you were talking about this a little bit earlier. It reminded me of my sort of journey as an actor and trying to. I wanted to play every role going. I wanted to be the lead in this, the lead in that. I wanted an audition for everything because I was like, I can do this, and sometimes I wouldn't even get seen for these roles. And it took me a while to go, well, I can't be right for every role. I don't look right. I don't sound right. I'm not your traditional, leading man or whatever it might be. And once I understood what my roles were, where my strengths were, what I was right for, what I was wrong for, it made my life so much easier. It made me, it took a lot of the stress out of it. And even now, really, as a theatre director, I'm an associate director. Really, I'm often working, recreating other people's work, and I do some bits of my own, but the majority of my work is recreating other people's. And people are like, well, don't you want to have your name right at the top? And I'm like, well, actually, I'm quite happy. I do quite well. I've been around the world. I've worked on great big productions, and I enjoy it. I know my role. I know my strengths, and I'm comfortable with that. And I think sometimes there's something to be said for that, rather than always striving for that thing that's just out of reach, and maybe not having the not getting the results you want in the end. So I can see those similarities.
Yeah, I always felt it was important to understand pecking orders and where you are and where you as you've just said how you can fit into a particular team but still be appreciated, and also playing to your strengths. Albeit I scored a lot of goals when I was younger at Norwich City, I think that I always played better when I did play up front in a two with a partner. My greatest strength I always felt was that I was a good focal point. I could understand the game well. I had decent peripheral vision and I could link up well. I always if I was playing with a striker who had pace, I could be the foil and they could run in behind and I could slide them through, and that was really a large part of my role within the successful teams which I played in.
You've used the word environment a few times. I'd love to sort of just touch on a culture within a team, and certainly more within business. Can you pinpoint what that winning culture was at Blackburn at the time that took you to the Premier League? Was there anything in the leadership, anything in the structure? What was it at that club that gave it that environment that you felt you and the rest of the players could thrive in?
Well, I think firstly, so going from Norwich to Blackburn and the players I played with, I've mentioned at Norwich, I don't think we ever believed that we could win the Premier League, or we never had a conversation in the dressing room about winning the Premier League. I think the expectation levels at Blackburn were there because they'd pushed Manchester United so closely the previous season. We had a manager, Kenny Dalglish, who was had a wonderful playing career, but had been a successful manager at Liverpool, and he'd gone to Blackburn to try and win the Premier League. I think our greatest strength as a team and we were quite a young team, was our game intelligence. And we've spoken about being adaptable, but understanding how to win a game. And that was our greatest strength. We knew what we were good at. If you look back through Premier League history, that Blackburn Rovers team, you wouldn't say that we were the purest football team, but we knew what we were good at and how to function. And we would certainly in the early part of that particular season, we just blew teams away with our physicality. We had two good wingers. We could be pretty direct, but we were streetwise. And I think for a team we didn't have a lot of experienced players or players north of 30 in the team. I think there was a guy who came from West Ham, Tony Gale, who played the first half of that season, he was a clever footballer, intelligent footballer. Tony was good centre half, but other than that, we were mostly guys in the early mid-20s, but we had this real ability to understand what we were good at, and we were ruthless. So I think that was our greatest strength. I think in terms of our manager, Kenny had clout as a player, but he wasn't big. He wasn't a shouter at all. He knew every player out there in terms of the opposition strengths and weaknesses, and he'd always come and have a word about direct players who we were playing up against, and maybe think about stretching them in behind or whatever. And he'd give little nuggets of advice. But towards the end of the season, when we did creak a little bit, I think that Kenny was really important. His role as manager, because he must have sensed we were getting nervous. He had been there and done it, and he didn't flinch. And when in those times when and I went to the last game of the season at Liverpool when we won the league, but we had started to creak a few weeks before that. And the game before the Liverpool game was a game against Newcastle. And we ended up winning that 1-0, and our goalkeeper Tim Flowers played particularly well. But I think in the games, especially at the end of the season, we looked to him for leadership and strength, and I think that he certainly gave us that. And whether he sensed we were creaking and losing a bit of momentum at that particular time, whether inside he was thinking we were, he didn't show that. And I thought that was important, because had he flinched and had he had that doubt towards the end of the season, then I think that possibly we wouldn't have ended up winning the league, but we did, and deserved to.
You touched on earlier when you spoke about your dad. You spoke about tough love, and certainly in football we hear about Alex Ferguson and the hairdryer treatment. You just touched on Kenny then, who wasn't a shouter, you said, and then you played under, I think, Martin O'Neill. Was he your manager at Celtic?
Yeah.
So there's different people, and then I also heard you on 606 at the Euros. You were very supportive when people used to sort of question Gareth Southgate. I see there's so many different styles of leadership, and I suppose football has changed quite a lot over the years. Have you experienced firsthand what styles sort of work and don't work, and what you were really drawn to as effective leadership? You don't need to name names if you don't want to, but just anything there that people can take into the business world as well, perhaps.
I always look for managers to be analytical and clear in what. As a player, I always wanted to have an understanding of what my role and responsibilities were in the various teams which I played in. And I say virtually every time I'd cross the white line to go onto the pitch, I was pretty clear in what was expected. I think from me, I think where players do come unstuck is if they don't have an understanding of what their particular role is. So, it's the manager or the leader's role to, to make sure everybody is aware of their role and responsibility, and that's and what you're trying to achieve as a team. And I would say I was lucky enough to, most managers, if not all managers I played under, I would say that I was pretty clear in what was expected from me, and then fairness. I know what was right and what was wrong, and I've spoken about being very very critical of myself. So if I was having a particular poor game and I got a dressing down from a manager, I wouldn't have a problem with that. I do think that there have been, as good as the managers I played under, there were managers at times who would tear a strip off a player or two at half time, and I would always think about the effect that would have on that particular player going out and playing in the second half. And that's not a criticism. I think that that football's a passionate game, and certainly when I first got into the first team at Norwich City, shouting was very normal, and I do think that has changed over the years. But I was always, as a player, I think I was pretty fair, but I would always think about, especially as I got older, the impact that my words would have on another player, and what would be the desired outcome, really, of my words. So I was always quite big, believe it or not, on little words of encouragement and praise. And I get you have to have different types of players in a dressing room, and we had a guy at Celtic called Neil Lennon who was a serial moaner, and I get that, and that was what drove him on, and I never used to mind that, but I always used to think, if you're going to criticize a player, are you? And I'm not saying Neil did, but are you helping the team? And and everybody has different attributes, and some people are mentally tougher than others. So I think there's an element, certainly when you're a manager or a leader, that it's understanding what makes that particular person tick, and how you can get the very best out of a particular individual. So I think that's the most important thing in the art of management. And you're trying to to create that team ethic and that team environment. So that's a challenge. But I do think that that some people can take criticism better than others. I never used to mind, really, criticism. I think throughout my career I got in maybe two or three arguments with managers who I thought were who were plainly wrong about the way I'd played a particular half of football, and I told them so at half time. And I mean, it didn't end particularly well, but I felt that I was justified in sticking up for myself. But in the main, if I hadn't played well, I would, I used to take it and just get on with things. I think that's honesty.
Well, exactly. I was going to say, and the open and honest communication is important, but I think you've hit the nail on the head in the fact that there's different ways of delivering that, and that people have different preferences and need to receive it in different ways as well. I think is not really a one size fits all for everybody. So it's being aware of what people need in order to perform at their best, I suppose, is the approach.
Yeah. So what's the phrase? Do as you would be done. But I don't know whether that's necessarily right or not. But I do think it is understanding how you can get the very best out of the team, and they're all different components of a team. And I think most players I played with, or looking at players I played with, some were far stronger characters than others. So it is understanding that and what makes them tick. You do not treat everybody the same as far as I can see, and you shouldn't treat every player the same. It's having that understanding uh, of what makes a particular player tick, but just little things like, I mean, yeah, I always used to people like Martin O'Neill and Kenny Dalglish. I quite liked the way that they managed in terms of they were sparing with the praise, but when they did give you a bit of praise, you'd feel like 10 feet tall.
Yeah.
And they were guys who you'd want to run through a wall for, really. But yeah, when they praised, so that was, it was interesting the way that that they did that. But even I think the whole environment thing is important. I think communication, just asking, you go in the morning and manager asking you how you are, how's the family. Maybe they don't care, but I actually think that's it's a good starting point to feel, to feel wanted. That
Yeah.
I little things like that I think are really important, and they're minor parts of communication, but I wouldn't underestimate how far they go, because essentially you want to work in an environment you like. You want to work for a manager who you like, and there's nothing wrong with being courteous and just being a reasonable person. And that's so I think that's a large part of creating an environment where you get everybody pulling in the same direction, because everybody wants the same thing. Everybody wants to win. But I always found that you often find everybody talks about team spirit, and we did the keynote course and what have you. And everybody, when they say, "Oh, well, the team spirit, we won because of our team spirit." I'm not totally convinced with that. And when I say I'm not totally convinced with that, it's easy when you're winning and everything's going well. It's when things don't go so well, and you go through a bit of adversity, when you really find out about people and your team spirit. Is in those moments, those dark moments, when you look across your dressing room and you find out who your mates are and who the real good team guys are. And I've experienced both sides of that.
I think that's very valid. I was just going to pick up on something you said about positive reinforcement as well. That whole idea of the positive language and as well as the negative. I remember I was working in Japan and I was so focused on picking out what was wrong, I forgot to praise when things were right, because I was trying to fix things the whole time. And I remember someone looking at me saying, have I done anything right? And I was like, oh my God, there's so much right. There's so much right here. I'm just focusing. And it was a real life lesson for me to go, no, you really need to pick up on what works well, because you're going to need to keep people on side, certainly.
I suppose that it's that balance, and it's not easy, but that's where actually knowing somebody's traits and how they work is important, because then at least, and getting to know your team, then at least when a manager will know, he will have a chance of saying the right thing, getting knowing what makes you tick. So one player you can be pretty straight and direct and harsh with. Another player you may think, well, if I'm straight and direct and harsh with this particular player, is that going to benefit him? So he might need more cajoling or kindness, because essentially you want to get the best out of the group. So that is the difficulty, I suppose, of being a manager. And especially I don't know what it's like in the theatre world, but especially you have half times, you have breaks and what have you, but in the football world, you have 15 minutes at half time, and you need to get so much. At times, managers want to get so much instruction across, and maybe want to change so many things, and that's not long. So words are really important.
Communication's key at that point. Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. Chris, just before I wrap it up here, it's been great chatting to you. Got one of those sort of open questions. It's just about if you could pinpoint the sort of best life advice you've received during your career. Is there something you take away that's been a great, and maybe but going back to your dad where we started, but something that you've taken with you and has sort of been a bit of a mantra for you throughout your work?
Yeah, it's certainly. I was lucky to have the career which I had, but having the career was all down to my dad and him pushing me, and just that in the those days I've spoken about them, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. I remember we were doing, I think when I was 15, he at the school field, he was giving me these intense running sessions. It was like 800 meters, and you do a 1-to-1 recovery. And so I think the 800 like 240 or something like that. I don't know whether that's quick or not. I may be getting the times wrong. I think it was 240, something like that. You'd have a 1-to-1 recovery, do it again, then did 12 minutes off and do the same again. And I remember after I'd done about 7 or 8 of them, because we did 2 sets, I was absolutely like just knackered. I can't be, I just need to stop. I can't do it. I can't do it. And he was actually quite not forceful, but very firm about the importance of, this is actually what's going to make you, and how many other kids will be out here doing that and pushing yourself. Just the importance of giving it your lot. Don't quit, give it your lot, and doing more than everybody else. And that simple thing. And I do this. I've got a daughter who's a useful little cricketer, and I'm big into. I think we met before. I'm big into the 10,000 hour rule. Not exactly the 10,000 hour rule, but in the fact that certainly in sport, doing more than everybody else. If my daughter hits 100 cricket balls every day, then that's. I mean, what are the maths here? It's 36. So if she hits 100 cricket balls every day, that's 36,500 cricket balls she's hit throughout the course of a year. How you think about that? That's quite a lot. That gives her, I think, a far better chance of being a better cricketer or a better batter than most others. And that's a very basic way of looking at things, but that's the way that I've always worked. Do more. Just simply do more. Give yourself the best possible chance. Everybody wants to do well, so why wouldn't you give yourself that chance?
Go that extra yard. Seems a great point, a great way to finish. Chris, thank you so much. I really appreciate your time, and it's been great chatting with you.
Thanks, Chris.